Hello, and thank you very much for tuning in to the podcast series by the New Silk Road Project. I'm your host today, Charles Stevens, the founder of the New Silk Road Project. This series is dedicated to understanding and raising awareness of one of the most important development strategies of the 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative. The centerpiece of the New Silk Road Project, an initiative supported by Jeep, CSIS, Magellan Capital, the University of St Andrews and Shira, was to travel the course of the Silk Road economic belt from London to Yiwu in eastern China, interviewing the key actors and academics along its course. We will have to apologise in advance for some of the tangential moments in this podcast series, and also the variable quality of audio footage. We do hope this series sheds important light into China's growing global presence and the significant changes taking place across Eurasia. After leaving The Hague, we headed back down to Rotterdam to speak to Michiel Nijdam, the corporate strategist at the port. Here he gave us insight into the way in which the maritime roads plugged into the Silk Road economic belt, and whether the Port of Rotterdam was a gateway or a final destination for the Silk Roads of the future.
Well, my name is Michiel Nijdam. I work at the Port of Rotterdam as a corporate strategist, which means that I'm involved in long-term planning of this port and the Port Authority.
Okay.
And you are here at the Port of Rotterdam, which is the largest seaport of Europe and the main gateway for a lot of cargo coming from all over the world, but specifically China is a large trade partner of us.
Well, no, we looked around earlier and you've got a fantastic operation, so no, it's great. And as you saw, we have a particular interest in the Belt and Road Initiative, which I know you attended the trade conference there earlier this year. It's been 5 years now since its inception when it started, and how have you been working to incorporate this into your long-term vision at Rotterdam?
Yeah, we saw the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative from China 5 years ago when Xi Jinping announced the way to the West and in a very broad strategy to connect China, Europe and all the countries in between. And of course that drew our interest at the first moment because it, obviously will have an influence on our position as a port and the relationship between Europe and China. So we started to think about what will this mean for Rotterdam and how can we, hopefully benefit from it. So we took the Belt and Road initiative and our own strategies and saw if they align a bit, and it appears they actually do. Because we want to be a gateway for maritime cargo, but also have very good connections to the rest of Europe, of course. And our strategy on developing rail connections to the center and eastern part of Europe very much aligns with the idea of the Chinese to develop rail connections from China through Eastern Europe all the way to Western Europe. So we're working on the same plan, basically, but from different ends.
Okay, and so leading on from that, I mean, is rail transportation the main way you're trying to improve efficiency within the port, or what end are you coming from that perspective?
We are coming from the position that we have, of course, a lot of ocean-going vessels in the port with a lot of cargo. That cargo has to go from here to the hinterland and the other way around, of course. Half of that cargo is moved by truck from the port, and 40% by barge, and 10% by rail, more or less. Mm-hmm. So rail is a relatively small part of the cargo, but it's important to develop that rail connection for locations that are not nearby, which is serviced by truck. And not along the River Rhine, which is obviously done by barge. So for all the new expanding markets in the center of Europe, rail is very important. So we invest there in efficiency by connecting all the container terminals in the port very well to rail, to develop things like real service centers to stimulate new services of real operators. That's what we do.
Thank you. It's a good answer. Thank you. So I guess moving on from that, do you see Rotterdam as a final destination for freightage? Or do you see in the long term, 15, 20, 25 years, maybe even longer, it being more as a gateway for maritime transportation?
Yeah, well, the Port of Rotterdam, I think, will always be a gateway. But the gateway function can be part of different supply chains, of course. Rotterdam is a gateway for ocean cargo now, mainly. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, bit more cargo comes from the land side, but also for that, Rotterdam can function as a gateway for Chinese cargo or maybe Kazakh cargo or wherever from which country through Rotterdam to the UK, the United States, anything you can reach within 2 weeks sailing,
yes.
You could say.
I mean, you're fantastically positioned between the major markets of the US and Asia. And
yeah.
I mean, with that said, and you touched on it with your Chengdu, Tilburg, Rotterdam Railway, you've expanded that, I think, to three transportation loads a week now.
Yeah.
Do you have plans for further expansion, maybe opening up new routes?
Well,
First,
you give us a bit too much credit for that rail, because the rail operation is done by the Verstijnen Group, it's a Dutch company that operates rail connections, and we work together with them to promote it. So we, as a port authority, we don't run trains to China, or we don't decide how many trains will run. But we help them promoting this connection. And the basic is now 3 times a week, and at busy times they move it up to 5 times a week. And we hope they will increase this, and also if other companies can open rail links to Rotterdam, that would benefit, of course, our position. So we're very much willing to help them also. Yeah.
Super, thank you. And of course, COSCO purchased the Port of Rotterdam. Port of Piraeus.
That will be one step too far, I think.
Let me clarify, the Port of Piraeus. And I know they do have some stake and some interest in the Port of Rotterdam.
Yeah.
Do you worry, though, specifically in the context of the Belt and Road, that this purchase of Piraeus will make Piraeus a more important gateway into Europe?
To start with a simple answer, no. Okay. We're not worried about Piraeus or COSCO owning Piraeus. A couple of reasons for that, but the most important one is that Piraeus is really on the other side of Europe. It's quite far from here. The main markets we serve are within a reach of 800 kilometers from here. And if you look at the location of Budapest, which is right in the middle of Piraeus and Rotterdam, that's over 1,200 kilometers. So we do not have overlapping service areas. But nevertheless, it draws our interest, of course. If a party opens or buys a complete port, and not only terminals, and they increase the efficiency of that port, and it's becoming more and more a hub in the East Med. So Piraeus is a competition for Turkish ports, for Egypt ports, as serving as a hub in the Mediterranean, and less so a competitor for ports in the northwest of Europe.
Thank you. So you discussed improving efficiency with the hinterland, but are you also making investments in this yourself?
Yeah, of course. We invest a lot in increasing the efficiency of the port. And where we invest is in the port area. One major investment we are doing now is the container exchange route on Maasvlakte, our large expansion, where there are 5 large-scale container terminals. And we are connecting these container terminals with dedicated infrastructure to make it possible to exchange containers between the terminals, but also to, for instance, a rail service center, where you can easily connect all the large-scale container terminals in Rotterdam to the dedicated cargo rail that is running from the port all the way to Germany.
And of course, I'm sure you're aware with COSCO, there's been the polar melt, and that's opening up the trans-Arctic route above the Russian coastline. And I mean, it strikes me that the Port of Rotterdam is very well positioned, potentially, if this becomes a fully functional route, to take advantage of that. Is this something you're incorporating into your strategy? Is this something that you've taken much note of?
Well, of course, we take note of that, of all changing shipping patterns in the world. Well, first of all, of course, we hope that the Nordic route will never expand to be a large route, because that will mean we have a whole other problem in the world. So, well, hopefully we'll get global warming to a stop. For the rest, well, you can say a couple of things about the Nordic route, but the most important one is, I think, for Rotterdam, that it is not a likely route for large-scale container transports. So it will not be the 20,000 TEU vessels going north. That will be uneconomically, and also the route is not really suitable for these large ships. So the southern route through the Suez will always be the route for the large-scale maritime transport, I think. And for the smaller transport, it might be a feasible route. But for Rotterdam, it doesn't really matter what route the ships take, as long as it brings the cargo to Rotterdam. And where the cargo goes is highly dependent on where the people live and where production facilities are. And people and production are in the west of Europe, and that's serviced by Rotterdam. So it doesn't change that much for us.
And you touched on this, and I know it's something that you're very much working on, is implementing sustainable techniques and practices into the port. And just walking around, Tom and I, yesterday, you can see that's that's something that's very evident. But coal and oil shipments, petrochemicals are very important to you guys. Yeah. How are you going to balance these competing tensions?
Well, yeah, we are working on that. It's something of really a long-term development, of course. But it is clear that in a couple of decades we will not use coal for energy. We will not use too much oil to burn for transportation. So that will change the face of the port. We are working on it now. We have an energy transition program, which is, well, basically we summarize it by a dual strategy. It is renewing what is here and at the same time welcoming the new businesses. So there will be a transition of decades where oil companies might change their business a bit, but they start first with making things more efficient, using less energy, which is also true for all the chemical complexes here, and we will help them with that by reusing their heat from production, or we are making plans for underground CO2 storage. So that, you could say, is the first step to help the existing business being more efficient. The second step is helping companies transform their production, and they might need a bit of our help for that. And later, maybe some companies might stop, and they might return the land to us. That will be, somewhere in 20 years, maybe the first, and then we have to redevelop that and to make sure that there's already companies that can use that ground. We now start with small-scale new businesses. I have facilities to trial and error kind of production sites, pilots. So we think we are ready for the transition in the coming, 30, 40 years maybe? Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess sort of zooming out a little bit to the Netherlands in general, the Netherlands is now China's third trading partner within the EU. Specifically in regards to BRI, there isn't at the moment a sort of coherent and cohesive strategy within the EU. Do you think specifically Western European nations, and if you want to discuss Europe in general, please do, should be forging closer ties with China?
You're asking whether they should have closer ties with China, right?
There's been a reluctance within the context of BRI to forge closer economic ties, and this is something that the Netherlands has embraced. Should other companies like Britain, Spain, anywhere else be embracing those too?
Well, if you're talking about embracing BRI, I think it's very good to work together with any trade partner to enhance logistics systems, to make trade easier. So in that sense, yeah, you should embrace that development. At the same time, you should also be aware of, well, like the EU says, like the Dutch government says, it has to be an equal partnership. So that's an important thing to take into account. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I guess from your perspective, what do you see as being the greatest challenge to the Port of Rotterdam in the next 25 years?
Yeah, well, we have touched upon some, and in 25 years a lot will happen. So we have some challenges. One that's an everyday challenge is make the logistics here as efficient as possible, which is done by increasing all the information for the players here, developing digital tools for smoothening the logistics. That's a challenge for the coming 5 years, to really have that top of the world logistics. Further, the energy transition and anything that happens in line with that, with change of production, with more energy coming from wind farms, for instance, and make sure that that energy comes to the port and that is used to renew all the industrial processes here, make it sustainable. I think that's the largest long-term challenge we have.